Maria was a woman who lived a simple life. She was not someone people usually noticed when she walked into a room. Her clothes were always plain and practical, her hair tied back neatly without any fancy style, and her shoes were worn but comfortable. She lived with a quiet grace, never seeking to be the center of attention. To many, she seemed ordinary, but behind her silence lived a world full of untold stories and hidden strength. That evening, she was invited to a community event in the small town where she lived. It was the kind of gathering where neighbors came together, families brought food, children played in the corners, and young people filled the air with laughter. The town hall was decorated with strings of lights, and a little stage was set up at the front. People were excited, there would be games, music, and fun performances. Maria arrived quietly and sat at the back, blending into the crowd. She smiled politely when people greeted her, but she mostly kept to herself. She had never been the kind of person to enjoy the spotlight. She loved to watch others perform, clap for them, and admire their confidence, but she never imagined herself standing on that stage. As the evening went on, a group of young people noticed Maria sitting silently in the corner. They had seen her many times before in town. She always carried herself with calmness, but they thought she looked too simple, too ordinary, too plain to ever be part of something exciting. They whispered among themselves and laughed. "Look at her sitting there," one of them said. "She hasn't said a word all night." "Yeah," another added, "let's make her do something. It'll be funny." Their eyes turned toward the stage. A few local singers had already performed, filling the hall with energy. The young group thought it would be entertaining to push Maria into the spotlight. Not because they believed in her, but because they thought she would fail. To them, it was a joke, a harmless prank that would give everyone a laugh. They walked over to her with mischievous smiles. Maria looked up at them kindly, not suspecting their intentions. "Maria," one of them said in a playful voice, "you should sing for us. Come on, don't just sit here all night." Her eyes widened in surprise. She shook her head softly. "Oh no, not me. I'm fine here. I'll just enjoy watching." But they didn't stop. They insisted, laughing as they tried to pull her from her chair. "Don't be shy. Everyone will love it. Come on, let's hear your voice." The crowd began to notice what was happening. Some people chuckled, already expecting what they thought would be an awkward moment. Others looked on curiously, wondering how Maria would react. Maria's heart began to race. She was not used to this kind of attention. She wanted to say no again, but more people were now encouraging her. Some clapped their hands, chanting her name. She felt trapped in the middle of their voices. Her palms grew sweaty, and she looked around the hall, hoping someone would step in to save her. But no one did. Instead, she was gently guided, almost pushed toward the stage. The organizer, not realizing this was meant as a mockery, smiled and handed her a microphone. Maria stood frozen. The microphone felt heavy in her hands. The stage lights blinded her eyes as she looked at the crowd. She could hear giggles from the corner, the very group that had forced her up there. She knew what they wanted. They expected her to stutter, to sing off-key, to give them a reason to laugh. For a moment, Maria thought about running off the stage. She could leave, go back home, and forget this humiliating night. But something deep inside her held her still. She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the microphone. Her mind was full of doubts. The host asked kindly, "So, Maria, what will you sing for us tonight?" Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. She glanced at the audience, and for a brief second, she saw only mocking faces. But then, in the back of the hall, she caught sight of a little girl clapping her hands in excitement, waiting to hear her. That small spark gave Maria the courage to stay. The music started to play softly in the background. Maria closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise of the crowd, the laughter, and the pressure pressing against her chest. She told herself, just one breath, one note, and then another. Her heart pounded like a drum, and she felt as if the whole world was waiting for her to make a mistake. In that moment, standing there in silence, Maria felt the weight of being underestimated her whole life. People had always looked at her and thought she was nothing special. They had seen her as just another face in the crowd. And now, here she was, about to prove them right, or maybe, for the first time, about to prove them wrong. She inhaled deeply, gripping the microphone tighter. The first note was about to leave her lips. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for the show they thought would turn into a joke. Maria's journey was about to take a turn no one in that hall could have imagined. Maria stood on the stage, her hands shaking as she held the microphone. The hall was full, and every eye was on her. For a woman who had always lived quietly, this was one of the hardest moments of her life. She had not asked for this attention. She had not prepared. She had not even imagined herself singing in front of so many people. Yet here she was, placed in the center of the stage as if she had always belonged there. The crowd was restless. Some were whispering to each other, amused by what they thought would happen. They expected Maria to stumble, to forget the words, or to sing in a way that would sound silly. A few chuckles already came from the young group who had forced her up. They looked at her with smirks, waiting for their little prank to unfold. Maria's heart beat so fast she thought the microphone might catch its sound. She tried to clear her throat, but her voice caught in her chest. She whispered to herself, "Just breathe, just breathe." The music began slowly, a soft tune filling the hall. Maria knew the song. She had listened to it many times before in her small kitchen while washing dishes or cleaning the house. It was a song she loved but had never sung in public. She often sang it to herself quietly when no one was listening. It was her secret companion on lonely days, a reminder that she still had something inside her that was alive and full of passion. But now, with everyone staring, that same song felt impossible. Her throat tightened, her knees trembled, and her mind screamed at her to walk away. She thought of handing back the microphone, saying she couldn't do it. But then she remembered the laughter behind her, the mocking looks, the cruel smiles. If she walked away now, she would be giving them what they wanted. Maria closed her eyes. She tried to imagine she wasn't in the hall. She wasn't on stage. She was back at home in her small room, singing quietly with no one to hear but herself. She thought of her late mother, who had once told her, "Your voice is a gift. Don't hide it from the world." Those words echoed in her heart, steadying her breath. The first line of the song hovered on her lips. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. For a second, the crowd laughed softly, thinking it was already a failure. But Maria didn't let go. She gripped the microphone tighter and tried again. This time, a soft, shaky note escaped. It wasn't strong, but it was real. She held onto it, stretching it carefully, letting it carry into the hall. The crowd grew silent. Not because it was perfect, but because it was unexpected. No one thought she would even try. Encouraged by that small beginning, Maria took another breath and let out the next line. Her voice was still quiet, but it carried something deep inside it: emotion. The laughter stopped completely. People leaned forward, realizing she wasn't going to back down. The young group that had pushed her looked at each other, confused. This wasn't what they had planned. They wanted her to fail, but instead, she was beginning to surprise them. Maria felt her voice grow steadier with each word. It was as if the music itself was giving her strength. She had always loved singing, but she had buried that love under years of silence. Now, forced into the spotlight, her heart was reminding her of something she had long forgotten: that singing wasn't just about sound, it was about truth. Her eyes remained closed as she continued, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. She could almost forget that the hall was full of people. In her mind, she was free, singing to the stars, singing to her mother, singing to the part of herself that had been silent for too long. The crowd listened carefully. What had started as a joke was slowly turning into something else. Even the children who had been running around paused to watch. Maria's voice, though not yet at its full power, was touching something in their hearts. A man in the front row leaned to his wife and whispered, "She can really sing." The wife nodded, her eyes fixed on Maria. "She's nervous, but there's something in her voice. It feels real." As the song reached the middle, Maria began to loosen. Her fear melted little by little, replaced with courage. She opened her eyes now, not to look at the crowd but to let the song guide her. The notes flowed smoother, her voice growing stronger, filling the corners of the hall. Gasps of surprise rippled through the audience. They had expected trembling notes, awkward pauses, maybe even a nervous laugh. But what they were hearing was the start of something powerful. Maria herself felt different. The more she sang, the lighter she felt, as if all the years of being invisible, all the times she had been overlooked, were falling away. She wasn't just a simple woman anymore. She was a singer, even if just for this one moment. The young group that had mocked her shifted uneasily in their seats. Their smirks faded, replaced by frowns of disbelief. This wasn't funny anymore. Their prank was backfiring in front of everyone. Instead of watching Maria fail, they were watching her shine. Maria hit a high note, her voice clear and beautiful. The hall, once filled with whispers and laughter, was now wrapped in silence. Everyone was listening. Everyone was caught in the magic of her voice. And in that silence, Maria felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Maria's voice began to rise, stronger and more confident than before. It was as if every note carried years of silence, every word carried pieces of her heart. The hall, which had been full of laughter and whispers only minutes ago, was now completely quiet. No one moved, no one spoke. All eyes and ears were fixed on her. The first notes had been shaky, but now, as the song continued, Maria's voice bloomed like a flower opening under sunlight. It was rich, powerful, and full of feeling. She didn't just sing the words, she poured her soul into them. Her tone rose and fell like waves in the ocean, carrying the audience with her. A hush fell over the hall so deeply that even the sound of her breath between notes seemed to echo. The same people who had waited for her to embarrass herself now sat frozen, unable to believe what they were hearing. The young group who had forced her on stage shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their mocking expressions replaced with disbelief. Maria had closed her eyes again, but this time it wasn't out of fear. It was out of love for the music. She wasn't hiding anymore, she was embracing what had always lived within her. Each note lifted her higher, each word gave her courage, and with every line she sang, the world around her seemed to disappear. She imagined her mother again, the one who had told her long ago that her voice was a gift. She could almost see her mother's gentle smile, hear her encouragement, "Don't be afraid, Maria. Let the world hear you." Those words guided her, giving her strength she didn't know she had. The music swelled, and Maria's voice soared with it. She reached a part of the song that demanded strength and passion, and she gave it everything. Her voice was no longer soft, it was bold, fearless, and powerful. The notes filled every corner of the hall, bouncing off the walls, touching every soul present. The crowd's eyes widened in awe. Some people leaned forward in their chairs, drawn closer by the invisible pull of her singing. Others placed their hands over their hearts, moved by the unexpected beauty of her voice. One woman in the middle row wiped tears from her eyes, whispering to the person beside her, "She's incredible. Where has she been hiding all this time?" Maria's plain clothes, her quiet personality, her modest presence, all of that faded into the background. On stage, none of it mattered. She was no longer the simple woman. She was a singer whose voice demanded respect. The young people who had mocked her could no longer meet each other's eyes. They had wanted to humiliate her, but instead, they had given her the chance to reveal something extraordinary. Their laughter had died, replaced by shame. For the first time that evening, they felt small, as though the spotlight that had exposed Maria's hidden gift was now exposing their cruelty. Maria's voice climbed higher, hitting a note so pure and strong that it sent shivers through the crowd. People gasped softly, some even clapping without realizing it, carried away by the emotion in her voice. She wasn't just singing, she was telling a story, her story, through every line of the song. Her hands no longer trembled. Her knees no longer shook. Instead, she stood tall and steady, her eyes shining with a light that had been hidden for years. Every moment she had been underestimated, every time she had been ignored, every insult and every quiet sigh she had carried in silence, it all poured out through her song. It was as if the hall had been transformed. No longer just a community gathering, it felt like a concert, a place where something magical was happening. The audience had forgotten where they were. They were no longer waiting for the next performer, no longer distracted by side conversations or small laughter. They were united in one thing, the wonder of Maria's voice. Even the children sat quietly, their small eyes wide with amazement. They didn't understand the story behind the moment, but they felt the power of the music, the way it touched something deep inside. As Maria reached the heart of the song, she gave it everything she had. Her voice grew richer, carrying emotions so raw that some in the audience began to cry. It wasn't sadness that brought tears, it was the beauty, the honesty, the unexpected strength from someone they had overlooked. The young group sank lower in their seats. Their joke had turned into a moment they would never forget, but not for the reasons they had planned. They couldn't stop her. They couldn't laugh anymore. All they could do was sit there, swallowed by the greatness of the voice they had tried to silence. Maria opened her eyes again. For the first time, she looked directly at the audience. And when she did, she saw not ridicule, not smirks, not judgment, but awe. Their eyes reflected something she had never seen before: admiration, respect, even love. That sight filled her with more courage than ever. She sang louder, stronger, lifting the hall with her. The song reached its peak, and Maria delivered the highest note with power that sent chills down every spine in the room. It wasn't just a note, it was a declaration. A declaration that she was not invisible. She was not ordinary. She was not a joke. She was someone with a gift that deserved to be heard. The sound lingered in the air, vibrating through the walls, through the hearts of everyone present. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Maria let the note fall, softening into the final lines of the song. Her voice, though quieter now, still carried that same strength, that same honesty. As the music slowed, she gave the last words with gentle grace, closing the song not with fear, but with confidence. When the final note faded, there was silence. Pure, deep silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one clapped. They were too stunned to react. It was as if the entire hall had forgotten how to breathe. Maria stood on stage, her chest rising and falling with the effort, her face glowing with the relief of having given her all. She looked at the crowd nervously, unsure of what they would do next. And then, it happened. Someone stood up and clapped. Another followed. Then another. In seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, clapping, cheering, whistling. The sound of their applause thundered through the hall, louder than anything she had ever heard. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness, they were tears of joy. The same people who had once overlooked her were now standing, their faces full of admiration, their voices calling her name. The young group looked around in shame, realizing the night they had tried to ruin for her had turned into her victory. Maria stood there, overwhelmed, holding the microphone close to her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. Maria stood on the stage, the microphone still in her hand, her heart racing faster than it ever had before. The sound of applause filled the hall, echoing off the walls like a rolling wave. She had never imagined this moment, never dreamed that her voice would bring so many people to their feet. For a long time, she had been invisible, a quiet face in the background of life. But now, in that single moment, every eye was on her, not with judgment, but with admiration. The crowd clapped louder, some whistling, others cheering her name. The hall that had once been filled with laughter at her expense was now full of respect. Maria could hardly believe it. Her chest rose and fell quickly as tears welled in her eyes. She wasn't embarrassed anymore, she was proud. People began turning to each other, whispering in amazement. "Where has she been hiding this talent?" someone said. "She sings better than the professionals," another added. Many nodded, agreeing, still stunned by what they had just heard. The same children who had been restless earlier were now clapping excitedly, their small voices shouting, "Sing again! Sing again!" Their innocent excitement warmed Maria's heart. And then, slowly, something even more powerful happened. People began to rise from their seats, one after another. Soon, the entire hall was standing, men, women, children, old and young, all on their feet, applauding her with the energy of a crowd that had just witnessed something extraordinary. Maria's face flushed with emotion. She had never received such attention in her life. She felt a mix of relief, pride, and disbelief. For a woman who had always lived quietly, this standing ovation felt like a dream. The group of young people who had mocked her sat in their chairs, unable to join in the applause at first. Their faces were red, their eyes darting around nervously. They had wanted to humiliate Maria, but instead, they had only revealed her greatness. Some of them finally clapped, but their claps were weak, filled with guilt. They knew the truth: this moment would never be forgotten, and their cruel prank had turned into a lesson for everyone. Maria, overwhelmed, brought her hand to her chest and bowed slightly. "Thank you," she whispered into the microphone, her voice trembling with gratitude. The crowd roared louder, their cheers almost drowning out her words. People in the front rows began shouting compliments. "You have a gift. That was amazing. We need to hear you again." Their voices carried across the hall, wrapping Maria in encouragement. The event's host, who had been just as shocked as everyone else, walked onto the stage with a wide smile. He took Maria's hand and raised it into the air like a champion. The crowd cheered louder, clapping until their hands were sore. "This," the host said proudly, "is why you never judge a book by its cover. Tonight, we all witnessed something unforgettable." The audience agreed, nodding and clapping even harder. Maria lowered her head humbly. She didn't want to boast, but deep inside, she felt something shift. For years, she had been quiet, always letting others shine while she stayed in the shadows. But in that moment, she realized her voice was not just for her. It was a gift that touched others, a gift that could inspire. The applause went on, and people began chanting, "One more song! One more song!" Their voices filled the hall like thunder. Maria hesitated, her hands trembling again, but this time it was not from fear. It was from the overwhelming feeling of being loved and respected by so many. She looked at the host, who smiled warmly and handed her the microphone again. She nodded softly, her lips curling into a small but confident smile. The music started once more, a different song this time, and Maria began to sing again. Her second performance was even stronger than the first. With her fear gone, her voice flowed freely, powerful and steady, carrying across the hall with breathtaking beauty. The crowd swayed with the melody, some closing their eyes to absorb every note, others recording the moment on their phones to keep forever. The young group sat still, ashamed, as people around them clapped, cheered, and even cried. They realized they had not just underestimated Maria, they had been blind to her greatness. When Maria finished the second song, the crowd once again erupted into cheers. Some even shouted, "Encore! Encore!" She had gone from being the woman nobody noticed to being the star of the entire evening. After she stepped off stage, people rushed to her. Some shook her hand, others hugged her, and many told her how much her singing had touched their hearts. One elderly woman held Maria's hands tightly and said with tears in her eyes, "I haven't felt this moved in years. You reminded me of the beauty in life tonight. Thank you." Maria could only smile and nod, her eyes wet with tears. She had not planned any of this. She had not wanted the stage, yet somehow it had become the place where she found her true self. The young group finally approached her, their faces filled with guilt. They couldn't look her in the eye at first, but one of them spoke softly, "Maria, we're sorry. We didn't know." Maria looked at them with kindness. She could have been angry. She could have embarrassed them in front of everyone. But instead, she simply said, "It's all right. Maybe tonight we all learned something." Her gentle words struck them harder than any scolding could. They nodded, ashamed, but also grateful for her forgiveness. The rest of the night, Maria was no longer just a quiet woman in the corner. People surrounded her, asking her about her life, her love for music, and if she had ever thought of singing more often. She answered humbly, telling them that she had always loved singing but had kept it private. Many insisted that she should never hide her voice again. Maria felt overwhelmed but deeply grateful. She realized that something inside her had changed forever. The hall, once a place of laughter at her expense, had become a place of victory, a place where her hidden gift finally came alive. That night, as the event came to an end, Maria walked home under the stars, her steps light and her heart full. She knew she would never forget this evening. She had been forced on stage as a joke, but she had walked off as someone entirely different, someone strong, admired, and respected. Maria walked back home that night with the sound of applause still echoing in her ears. The streets were quiet, the lamps glowing softly, and the stars above seemed brighter than usual. Her steps felt lighter than ever before. She replayed the evening in her mind, how it began with whispers and mocking laughter, and how it ended with the entire hall standing on their feet, clapping for her. For so long, she had believed her life was small, ordinary, hidden in silence. But in just one night, everything had changed. She realized her voice wasn't just a secret talent, it was a gift that could touch hearts, a gift that could bring people together. At home, Maria sat by her window, looking out into the night sky. She thought of her mother's words again, "Your voice is a gift. Don't hide it from the world." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness, they were tears of joy, of gratitude, of pride. She whispered softly to herself, "You were right, Mama. They finally heard me." The next morning, Maria woke up to a surprise. Word of her performance had spread quickly through the town. Neighbors knocked on her door, smiling and congratulating her. Some brought flowers, others brought small gifts, and many simply came to thank her for the unforgettable night. "You made us feel something special," one neighbor said warmly. "You reminded us not to judge others by how they look," another added. Maria listened, humbled by their words. She had never thought her singing would mean so much to others. Soon, the story spread beyond the small town. Videos recorded on people's phones traveled through social media, and strangers from other places began to comment, praising her voice and her courage. Messages came in from people she had never met, telling her how her singing touched their hearts, how it gave them hope, how it inspired them to follow their own dreams. Maria was amazed. She had never wanted fame, never thought of herself as special. Yet now, people were calling her an inspiration. She realized that what had happened that night was bigger than her. It was a reminder to everyone that true talent and beauty are often hidden in places we least expect. The young group who had forced her on stage came to her again, this time with sincerity. They apologized deeply, telling her how ashamed they felt for mocking her. "We thought it would be funny," one of them admitted, "but we learned our lesson. We'll never judge anyone like that again." Maria smiled kindly at them. She had already forgiven them in her heart. "Sometimes," she said gently, "people make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them." Her words stayed with them for a long time. They walked away that day not only respecting Maria but also carrying a lesson that would change how they treated others forever. Days turned into weeks, and Maria's life slowly transformed. She was invited to sing at more community events, then at larger gatherings in nearby towns. Each time she performed, people were moved by the honesty in her voice. She wasn't just singing notes, she was sharing her soul. And people could feel it. Though opportunities began to open up, Maria remained humble. She didn't chase fame or riches. She stayed the same simple woman she had always been, kind, gentle, and modest. But now, she carried herself with new confidence. She no longer hid her voice, no longer doubted her worth. The people in her town treated her differently too. They no longer saw her as just another quiet face in the crowd. They saw her as someone remarkable, someone who had taught them not to underestimate others. Whenever she walked through the marketplace, people greeted her warmly, often saying, "Maria, sing for us again soon." One evening, months after that unforgettable night, Maria was invited to perform at a charity concert in a nearby city. The hall was much larger than the one in her town, filled with hundreds of people. Maria stood backstage, nervous again, but this time her fear was not the same. She knew now that her voice had power, and she was ready to share it. When she stepped onto the stage, the crowd welcomed her with applause. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. Just like that first night, silence fell over the hall as her voice carried through the air. People listened, spellbound, many moved to tears. At the end, the crowd gave her another standing ovation. Maria bowed, her heart full. She realized then that what had started as a cruel prank had turned into her greatest blessing. Back in her small town, she continued to live simply, but she was no longer invisible. She had found her voice, and through it, she had found herself. People respected her not just for her talent, but for her kindness, humility, and strength. And whenever someone in town began to mock or underestimate another, people would quickly remind them, "Remember Maria. Remember what happened the night she sang." Her story became a lesson for everyone, that behind every quiet face, every simple appearance, there might be a gift waiting to be discovered. And that laughter meant to belittle could sometimes open the door to greatness. Maria often thought about that night, the night she was forced onto the stage. At first, she had seen it as humiliation. But now, she saw it as destiny. If not for that moment, perhaps her voice would have remained hidden forever. One evening, sitting again by her window, she whispered softly, "Thank you." She wasn't thanking the ones who mocked her. She was thanking life itself, for giving her the chance to show the world who she truly was. Her journey was proof that no one should be judged by appearances, that kindness and talent often lie quietly, waiting for the right moment to shine. And when they do, they can leave the world speechless. Maria's powerful voice had not just changed how people saw her, it had changed how people saw themselves, and each other. And that was her greatest song of all.